County Library Association is able to provide the Zoom access for zero waste making
Columbia.
organics work for you. So I'm going to pass everything over to Maureen Wilson, and thank you for coming.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for attending. My name is Maureen Wilson. I'm a Zero Waste Columbia member. I'm a Climate Smart Committee member in Austerlitz, and I'm on the town board in Austerlitz also. I wanted to acknowledge everyone who helped to make this program possible. Our co-sponsors, the Climate Smart Committees of Austerlitz and Claverack, our host, Columbia County Library Association, and especially Thea Scoop, director of the Claverack Free Library. Just a word about Zero Waste Columbia. We are a citizen volunteer group committed to education and action, moving us towards zero waste in Columbia County, New York. Our members are also active participants in our town climate smart communities, our town councils, and the Columbia County Environmental Management Committee. Zero waste means we are striving to send nothing to the landfill. You may have heard this refrain before: reduce what we need, reuse as much as possible, minimize what we recycle, and of course, compost. We are delighted to have our speaker for tonight, Jean Bonhotal, my French accent, she's going to give us an overview of what is involved in composting on a small scale. But we also want to interest you in composting on a grander scale. We envision what is possible, bringing your food scraps and yard waste to other sites in the county if you are not able to do it at home. Those possibilities include community gardens, farmers markets, and possibly in the future to our transfer stations. Jean is a waste management specialist and director of Cornell Waste Management Institute in Soil and Crop Sciences. She has spent over 25 years in education of composting, not only of food, but of manure, animal carcasses, and studying compost quality and use. Jean, thank you so much for taking the time to join us this evening.
You bet. I'm glad to be here tonight. As you can see from my picture, I am in a car, but that's because of COVID and lack of signals where I need them to be. So we're not working in our offices right now. I want to talk about composting and making organics work for you through the next hour or so. But I want you to feel free to ask questions, to type questions into the chat box, and I'll be prompted to answer those just so we stay on course and we can build on the conversation. So I'm used to being with people and doing these and building some bins and all the hands-on things that we would like to do. It's just not possible right now. So hopefully we'll get back to that point again. Let's see if we can get there. There we are. Okay. The most important thing that we need to do with compost is actually to build our soils. Many of us compost because we like to garden. We like to have healthy properties. We like to live in a healthy place. So by using compost instead of a lot of chemicals and other means, we can create very healthy soils. And we'll talk about that through our time together. I want to first talk about the waste stream. A large portion of our waste stream is organic. And if you look at this pie chart, there are lots of them out there. It says it was from 2009. They don't change a lot. You know, they really don't. Sometimes we can recycle more paper, sometimes we can't. Sometimes plastics really crashed and we're not able to recycle as many plastics now. But if we look at this pie chart, we'll see paper, which is organic. We'll see food scraps, yard trimmings, wood, leather, rubber, textiles, all of those things actually, and my definition of organics is something that was once alive and now dead and needs to be managed. So I don't deal with it until that point, we get to that point. I want to talk a little bit about the EPA's waste hierarchy, food waste hierarchy. What we really want to do so that we're not generating that waste at all is source reduction. Now, we live in the Northeast and we have a lot of biomass. So because we have a lot of biomass, we're always going to have a lot of materials to manage: leaves, twigs, trees, storm debris, all of that kind of stuff. Plus, we're going to have food. We just don't eat everything. But I think it's really important for us to reduce as much as we can, buy what we need or grow what we need, give away what we can't. So, if we've bought too much, we may be feeding hungry people. We may get something to somebody else that would be able to use it before it goes bad. We also work on feeding animals with some of the food scraps. And I'll give you just a kind of a neat example that is in the Hudson Valley. And that is the Culinary Institute of America has had a multiple sort. They've taught their chefs to do a multiple sort in their kitchens. And their sorts actually are, you have that carrot and you're going to use the carrot, but you might not want the peels on it. So you're going to peel that. Those peels can go into a pot that you're going to make stock with, vegetable stock. The really dirty top might not be able to be used. So that might need to go into the compost bin. And then you have other things that might be able to go into soup. Maybe the carrot tops we're encouraging people to use for soups and for seasoning. So the Culinary Institute of America has been diverting their materials for composting for a very long time. We have video footage of them doing that, of them actually doing their sorts and everything. But they've come down to that point where they waste less because of that. They can actually separate things out. They also, if they have too much food, they also pass things on to food banks and other feeding areas. So feeding animals is another one. Industrial uses, composting. So industrial uses are more the energy generation. So taking corn, taking canola, taking other oils and things and using them. And landfill or incineration. And we really don't want to be landfilling or incinerating because landfilling is really a waste. That's a resource that we're just dumping, and we don't want to do that. And wet things like watermelons and such don't burn very well. So it doesn't help us really to be incinerating those. So we really want to pull some of those materials out of the waste stream. So why compost? Well, composting actually reduces the waste stream by about 50%. So when we compost, we try and fill up that bin. We layer our materials in, and you're going to hear me say layer a lot. We layer the materials into our bins and they keep going down. And we can't fill that bin that fast. It's not really hard to fill that. And that's because those wastes are starting to break down and we're reducing. Compost provides good habitat for beneficial soil microbes. One of the things that we're really missing, and I didn't get to read this article, but something came through on some essential microbes that are just not able to function in the soil because of pesticides and fertilizers. And that's something that compost actually does. It gets those beneficial organisms into the soil so that we can build soil. One of the most important things with composting is it actually holds soil moisture. So when we are going and we whatever we want to call it, whether it's global warming or climate change or whatever, we're seeing things getting drier and wetter at different points. I mean, we've seen flooding, we've seen drought. And by using compost, we create a sponge that holds the water for our plants to be able to use. And it keeps things from drowning. Using compost also suppresses disease. So we don't have to use as many herbicides and pesticides on our plants. Organic matter fills up landfills. It's just a waste of a resource. We don't want it there. And it converts organics into a soil-like product. It has nutrients, not high in nutrients generally, but it does have nutrients, and it actually builds a whole ecosystem when we use it. So making and using compost equals healthy soils, equals good food, and equals healthy people. And we work a lot on food security with composting. There are all different types of feedstocks. There are a few listed here, and I have them listed in colors, green and brown. Now there's a fact sheet that was put into the chat box, and it's called the green and brown alternative, or the brown and green alternative. I always get them mixed up. But the brown and the green represent the carbon and the nitrogen. So everything that's living has carbon and nitrogen in it. But the pile of wood chips is more carbon. The leaves are more carbon. The food waste up in the corner is more nitrogen. And there's endless amounts of feedstocks that can be composted. We made a list nationally of all the things that a lot of us have been asked to compost, and I put it in this this page. But it's interesting if you read through it, some of the things that we've been asked to compost. And remember, it's compostable if it was once alive and is now dead and needs to be managed. But you can see coconut coir, human manure, burnt grain from elevator fires. I was actually out on at a farm that had a barn fire. So we were composting the animals, the dead animals, and all the bedding and everything that was in that barn. So we are asked to compost a lot of different things. So it goes beyond the basics, but I just thought it was interesting. The kind of right in the middle there, you'll see the currency from the US Mint. That also gets composted, so nobody can glue it back together. So the process of composting is basically taking different organic materials or feedstocks, mixing them with carbon, and allowing those to work together for the microorganisms to work in that habitat and make compost for us. We can do a lot of the work in composting, or we can set up a habitat for the microbes to do the work for us. And I consider myself a lazy composter because I just don't have time to do a lot of work. And I have a lot of composts in a lot of different places. So I set my compost up so I don't have to do a lot of turning. And it just makes it easier for all of us in the long run. So we have a couple of posters, composting, how it works. We've got the microorganisms right on the top there, and we've got all the ingredients that we can be putting in there. And then we need to make sure we have microbes in there. And one of the questions I generally ask is, do we need to add microbes to our composts? Any thoughts out there? I don't know if we will. And
I would think that you wouldn't necessarily have to. Is that right?
That is right. And I use the old joke that I can grow just about anything in my refrigerator, and I'm not trying to. And that's because those microbes are on the food. We might have breathed on it. We might have, it might have gotten dirty somehow and all, and those are there. So we we always have those microbes available for the process to be working. The only time that those microbes might shut down is if we get our compost piles too hot. And if we get them too hot, then we kind of sterilize that pile. And when I do that, if something like that were to happen, or there was a fire in the pile, I would go ahead and add some manure to that and get it inoculated so that the process can start again. So I'm going to go through some more of this, but this is one of the posters, and then we have another poster just to give people ideas of how things work. What we're really doing in this is we're microbe farmers. So anybody who's composting is farming microbes. We want to create that habitat for them. We want to add lots of different food. And we have situations in municipalities where we're only allowed to compost leaf and yard waste. And actually when we have that situation, we have too much carbon really, and it takes longer for those leaves to break down because we don't have a nitrogen source in there. And I don't want people really to do this, but sometimes people will have to add nitrogen fertilizer to leaves to make them break down. And they'll break down on their own in the long run. But sometimes in municipalities where we have thousands and thousands of yards of material that have to be processed, sometimes they'll even do that to balance their carbon and nitrogen. Now, if the community composts food waste, if they have diverse feedstocks, lots of different materials, then they're going to have a healthy microbe population, and you're going to be bringing more microbes in that are beneficial to the breaking down the compost, and in the long run, adding those microbes to the soil. Actually, I'll jump back real quick there. This is a video actually, and this, I can't run it as a video on this, but if you go on YouTube, it's on YouTube, and it's vermicompost, a living soil amendment. And a graduate student took all of this micro footage of protozoum and paramecium and springtails and all that. And we have it in that video. And so you can go onto our website and see it there, or you can go onto YouTube and just Google it on YouTube, and you'll get there. And Allison Jack was the grad student that did it, and then we built it into a video, and it's very instructive. Pretty much for anywhere from middle school to high school to college. So what we need to do is we need to provide some requirements: some food, some shelter, and some moisture. And those are really the requirements of composting. Now, food is everything. It's all the carbon and all the nitrogen. It's all the feedstocks that we've been just talking about. Shelter can be anything. Shelter can either just be a pile, or it can be a wire bin or another type of container. And we'll go through some more of those examples as we get into different types of bins. So I'll explain some of those. That can be shelter, but it can be anything from no shelter, really, just a pile being the shelter, to having a container. And we need moisture, and moisture is very important. If we can dry out our piles, and they'll just stop. They won't work anymore because they don't have enough moisture for those microorganisms to actually work. So there's a whole food chain in there, as you can imagine. And you can see all different organisms in this picture, and they all work in different parts of the pile. And there's a book called, some of you may have seen it, and maybe it's in the library, called Worms Eat My Garbage. Well, it really has the wrong title, because it's Worms Eat the Microorganisms That Eat My Garbage, because the worms actually don't eat the garbage, they eat the microbes. So they're actually processing microbes, and they they make worm castings, produce worm castings. And we have a really nice material, a very high quality material that can be used in our plantings, in our gardens. People get excited when they see mushrooms, fungi, funguses in their compost. Funguses are there to break down lignin. If they didn't break down that woody tree waste, then we would be buried in wood. So we really do need those mushrooms. Don't just pick them and eat them, because we need to know what they are before we decide to do any mushrooming. But the mushrooms are in the compost pile so that they will break down the lignin in the woody waste.
We have a couple questions. Do you
You bet.
mind if we?
No,
do you
go
mind if
ahead.
Okay, so Stephanie says that we are trying to get some school districts to start composting. And she wondered, what do you feel are the compelling reasons to encourage school composting?
The compelling reason is because we should all be responsible for our waste. When we work with schools, we generally start with a weigh and sort. So it's an instructive process for the students. They can see what they're wasting. They actually can make suggestions about, oh, do we really need straws? Or do we need those little plastic cups? Or is there another way it can be conveyed, the food can be conveyed to us? So I think the weigh and sorts are a really neat thing to do to make kids aware of what is being wasted. There was actually, oh God, probably 25 years ago in New Hartford, New York, there was a weigh and sort done, and they did it with a middle school. And the middle school kids had to do interviews with each other. When they were doing the weigh and sort, they were doing interviews. And they're like, well, why did you throw your whole lunch out? It was like, because I wanted to go to the playground. And what that school was able to do was say, okay, you can go to the playground and then you can come and eat lunch. So they just flipped things around so that kids actually did eat their lunches, and they need their lunches. So it was interesting to get the kids' perspective on what needed to be changed. And I think that's really important, is to get everybody involved in what we're wasting, what we're doing, what we're wasting, and how we can change some of that. So, and composting, really, food waste composting is something that we really should be doing as a society, because it really is a waste just to throw all those organics away. They could be growing more food for us. And it's really important to be able to show that.
Thanks. Sorry to interrupt your train of thought.
No, not at all. Go ahead. And I see something about tortoise poop. I guess.
Do you want to talk about that now? Should we do that now, or do you want to? There's a couple of questions actually. So let me see. Linda wondered, she has a pet tortoise, and she uses hay and pulverized coconut shells for his habitat. Wondering if she could compost that, considering it also has the tortoise poop.
Yeah, it's not going to have, you're not going to have any problems with it. Go ahead and compost it. The poop that we don't want to compost generally is carnivore. So because there are things called zoonotic diseases, and boy, my voice is going too. Zoonotic means that we can get a disease from it. So we don't want to compost our pet manure, our dogs, cats, ferrets, all carnivores. We really want to avoid that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later.
A little bit related to that. Let's see. I don't know who asked this, but Can you comment if human urine from a healthy person could be safely added as a nitrogen source?
I've been asked that one a lot of times. And I always tell people, as long as you don't get arrested, it's probably fine. Just don't get arrested for indecent exposure. Okay.
And I think that question actually came from Parker, and he also asked,
Yep.
could describe the details of what weigh and sort means.
I will. Let me talk just a tiny bit more about the human urine, and it is fine to add human urine. Yeah, you can collect however you're going to collect it and use it. We actually had, I was working in Kenya, and they actually had pee-poo toilets where it was separated out. So the urine went one way and the feces went another way. And they were managed that way because it was a very densely populated area that we were working in. We also have a professor that is using some of the old big hay bales, and she's adding urine, human urine, in the form of, it's a nitrogen source. So she's adding that to the hay, and then they're going to plant in that. So what we're going to do is add the urine and let the hay bale actually absorb that for a while, and then be able to use that nitrogen source and the nitrogen and carbon and actually do some planting trials. So people could take one of those big round bales and actually use it as a planter eventually. So that's kind of a neat thing to do. And I've seen it in this country and in other countries, people actually having stuff like that. I've seen people do it, compost in super sacks and then plant in those super sacks. They're a big 4x4x4 cube sack that coffee and cocoa and things like that come in. So, okay. So should we go on?
Definitely, yep.
Okay, we talked about this one, so I won't do that again. So all kinds of organisms, there are mites, other soil invertebrates, they're all part of this whole process. And then really the earthworms, or if we're vermicomposting, the red wigglers, they come into the composting process towards the end. And if you have a soil bottom container, it'll take the worms a while to come in. And when we do vermicomposting on an industrial scale, we'll actually pre-compost the material. And some of that is so that we kill pathogens. So we'll bring it through a thermophilic phase, a hot compost, and then we'll feed it to the worms after that. And it also breaks things down a little bit so that the worms are ready to process it. But you'll see worms coming in toward the end of the process of thermophilic compost, partly because it's too hot and they can't be in that kind of heat. They're not the thermophiles. The microorganisms are. So just some more of our workers. So just a little bit of chemistry tonight. I won't go too far into it. It's pretty simple stuff. But we have our food waste. So we have the center, yard waste, food scraps, all that. We have to add microbes, or we have to have microbes there. We have to have oxygen because they breathe air just like you and I do. They need oxygen to go, they're aerobic. And we need moisture. That could be rain, snow, whatever. And then we get products out of that. And all of the words in the boxes on the bottom are products. Compost is a product. Carbon dioxide is a product. And what do we use carbon dioxide for? And we had a facility down in Windsor, New Windsor, that was actually using the carbon dioxide from the greenhouses, from the compost and from the fish production area. They're circulating that into the greenhouses because the plants need the carbon dioxide, right? It's part of that cycle. So we need that carbon dioxide, and that gets used by the plants as it's given off by the process. Heat and water, moisture. You'll see steam coming off of the compost pile. I'm going to just jump back to heat for a second. We lose a lot of heat through composting. We can have 120 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit in those piles. And that's a lot of heat. And we have facilities that actually are heating buildings from their compost piles, heating greenhouses, and just harnessing that material, that heat, to be able to use it for positive purposes. So I've talked a lot about these greens and browns. So the nitrogen we consider greens, it's the wet waste. So it's nitrogen, it's wet, it's green. And if we have too much, so if we just have a pile, a lot of times people will say, oh, I'm composting, and they'll just bring everything from inside their house out, all the apple cores and maybe the coffee grounds and maybe the watermelon rinds and things like that, and they'll just dump it in there. They're missing something. They need that carbon. So if I just bring all of that wet food waste out, I'm going to have a pile of slime. If I just bring grass clippings out, I'm going to have a pile of slimy, smelly material. If I bring out the carbon, so if I have carbon there and I put that in the layers, I put carbon down first, then I put nitrogen down, then I put carbon down, and then I put nitrogen down, then I'm going to have a balanced bin, and I'll be in great shape for making my compost be able to process itself. So if I have too much carbon, what happens? So if I have a pile of sticks and I come back in a year, I'm going to have a pile of sticks again. So I want to make sure that I have carbon and nitrogen together, all layered up, so that they can work with each other. And if I have too much nitrogen and I don't have balanced my carbon and my nitrogen, the nitrogen will actually go off as ammonia, and that'll go out into the atmosphere. And my plants aren't going to be able to use that once it goes into the atmosphere. So I want that ammonia to be, I want the carbon and nitrogen to be a balance, so that ammonia stays in the compost, and my plants are able to use that. I don't get hung up on carbon and nitrogen ratios at all, but I'm just going to show you a couple of things that are high in nitrogen and high in carbon. So our nitrogens are grass clippings, cow manure, horse manure. Horse manure actually is a pretty perfect balance when it comes out of that horse. So it's a 25-to-1. And that's good. So because we want 25 to 30 to 1 of carbon nitrogen. And what that means is I want 3 bins, or it can be a bucket loader, it can be a 5-gallon bucket, it could be a cottage cheese container. But I want 3 bins of carbon to 1 bin of nitrogen. And that's how I balance these. And I'll show you, I have another slide for that. The carbon. So I like to point out, everything has carbon and nitrogen in it, but I like to point out the bottom 4, because they're all wood products. And look at the variation in those wood products. Look at the differences there. We've got barks, we have paper, we have sawdust, and we have a dense log, just a log. And they're all different densities. And that has to do with the surface area. So if I have a wood chip, I have a lot more surface area, and a lot more organisms can actually work on that surface area. So if I have too fine a material like a sawdust, it doesn't allow very much air to go through. When I'm composting a cow, I'll use a cow or a deer. When I'm composting one of those, what I do is I make an envelope of wood chips all around it, 24 inches all around that carcass. And the reason I do that is because that creates a biofilter and it gives the right carbon to nitrogen ratio when that cow starts breaking down. Okay. So I make an envelope, but if I did that in sawdust instead of wood chips, the sawdust wouldn't allow air to circulate around that carcass and it would just sit there. It wouldn't break down. So I use that extreme example because it kind of works. And I can make a carcass, I can make that cow disappear in 3 months. So it breaks down. So that's why I was talking about surface area. We have wood chips, we have shavings, we have all different materials, but they're not all equal when it comes to how we use them in composting. We have some really high tech testing that we do. This is called the squeeze test. And this is to see if we have the right amount of moisture in our compost. We'll layer those materials in and then they start mixing and we can kind of see if they're moist. And the squeeze test, basically when I open my hand, I take a handful of material, I squeeze it. If I have water dripping down my arm, I have too much moisture. If I open up my hand and it all blows away, I don't have enough moisture. If I open my hand and I have a meatball, a loosely shaped meatball, then I have the perfect moisture level. And that's our high-tech method of figuring out our moisture levels in composts. It works. Our other high-tech, and these are higher tech, is we can tell what's going on in a compost pile by the temperatures that it reaches. Whether we're using, I often teach in Fahrenheit, we teach in Celsius as well. But these compost thermometers will tell you what's happening in your compost pile. If it's working, if it's not, if it's too dry, if it's too wet. We can figure that out through the fact that we either have no temperature or our temperatures are too high. A lot of times we won't have that much temperature in our backyard compost. And that has to do with the amount of feedstock that we actually have, the mass. So if we have a cube that is like 4 by 4 by 4 and it's perfectly mixed, we'll get temperature in that. We can get those temperatures in it because we do it in wire bins regularly. I like to have piles that are 5 by 5 by 5 in the Northeast, because if I have a pile that's well balanced, I can keep the temperatures in that, and that extra foot of material will insulate the pile and allow that pile to work through the winter, or that container to work through the winter. So it's important to have those masses in composting. So there are all different types of units. Do we have any questions that would affect processing or anything like that we should get into?
Let me see, just a second.
Containers and community?
Not at the moment.
Okay.
That I see.
Okay. So I'm going to get into, different types of containment. We have holding units, we have turning units, we have rotating drums, we have vermicompost units, and some people like to directly incorporate or pocket compost. They'll put organics directly in and just bury them into the ground, and that can be done. There are some reasons to do that at some times a year and not at others, but I'll talk about that a little bit. So there are different types of wire bins. These are framed wire bins, a little bit more sophisticated. We have just our typical wire bins. And if we were doing an on-site workshop today, I would actually be building some wire bins with you and maybe even giving you some wire bins to take home. It is my current favorite composting method because it keeps things neat, and I can barely fill those things up, and I go out of my way to find organics to fill up my bins with. So I'll even stop by at a neighbor's and take some leaves from them or other things from them if I need more organics. But these, we can actually fill these bins and we can get temperature in them. I like the 2x4 wire because it's simple. I can buy 50 yards or 50 feet or 100 feet, and I can make 10 bins out of it. So I'm able to, 8 or 10, depending on the sizes that I want to make. I'm able to do that, and I'm able to get going quickly and not employ there are a lot of plastic bins out there. A lot of those plastic bins are a little bit smaller than I'd like them to be. Remember that mass and keeping things going through the winter. So that's a possibility. My favorite rotating drum, let me do there's just a cinder block, partial cinder block bin down on the bottom. And then another way that I think it's great to involve kids with and everything else. I was doing some work in Haiti, and actually the kids that are older than these guys, these are young to be actually starting a business, but there were some older teenagers that were going to start a composting business. So we went and collected a lot of organics, some from roadside, some from groceries, some from other places. And we bought some of these barrels. They're 50-gallon barrels. And what the kids are able to do with these, and it makes things fun, is we fill them up with organics. So we'll put leaves and food waste and all kinds of stuff in. We'll drill a couple of holes in them so that their air gets into them. And then the kids were pushing these around the track that they had. And it's a great way to make compost, to have get the kids exercised. And so the younger kids that were at this particular school were working with the older kids, and they were doing the actual work and didn't know they were doing the work. So it's a fun thing to do. We do have balls that you can fill with organics and make compost as well, but they're usually not big enough really to heat up and stuff. So when you're going to use a rotating drum, make sure it's a big enough rotating drum to actually work. And that's why I like the 50-gallon drums with a lid so that it's not going all over the place. We also have pallets, and pallets are a great thing to use for composting. It's simple, it's easy. You can see the little eye hooks and the corners of this one. We fill it up, and then when we're done filling that one up, it's processing. We can unhook the hook and eyes and move it next to itself and start containing more organics. So these are used in community gardens and other places that there might be a little bit more organics. And I always like to have, and this is something that my grandmother taught me many years ago, is I like to do composting in threes. So I like to have an active bin, a bin that I'm adding to. I like to have a bin that is curing. So I've already filled it up and it's processing. And then I like to have one that I can actually use. It's already been processed and I can use the compost out of that. And we would do this in 3 piles. Each year we'd build a new pile, and then we always had a pile to use the next season. So it's an organized way to do it. And you'll see we have, I'll show you pictures of 3 bin units as well that actually make that work. This is a 2-can composter, and these can be used more in urban areas if we need to. I use one in my soil basement actually in the winter because it's too hard to get. I live up on Tug Hill where we get 200 inches of snow or so, and it's kind of hard to get out to the piles. So I just hold it in my basement. I put carbon and nitrogen. I have a lot of bark and stuff like that I can use. And I hold my my organics right in the basement in a system like this, and they actually are working. So I don't have to, once they're dumped into the outdoor compost pile, that's another turn. And I don't have to do that turn. It just goes right into the other bin outside in the spring. So it's just an easier way to do it. It can go through the whole process in those bins. And I know college students that have had them under their stairwells in the dorms. So worms and some of the stealth composters. Another wire bin. Oh, we must have gotten something messed up in there. Sorry about that. A 3-bin turning unit, and this is a small one for home scale. They set these up to be 3 by 3 by 3 or 4 by 4 by 4, depending on the amount of materials that you have. These have slats that you can see in the front there. So you actually can take those slats, you fill it all the way up, then you can take the slats out so you can turn it from one to the next to the next. You are going to fill up the first one, and then you have the second one. Now, I was talking a lot about carbon and nitrogen, and we want to have carbon and nitrogen all year round. Well, we get a lot of leaves in the fall, a lot of branches that are coming down. So if we can save those, and I encourage people to either have a garbage pail full of leaves, or the brown bags. The paper bags actually work really well. Just fill those with leaves and leave them out next to your composter so that every time you add food, you cover it with leaves. And that works out really well. So I'm always having a carbon bin of some sort on the end, either in one of the bins or on the end even further out. So that I have my carbon source, because then you don't just have a pile of wet, messy material.
Jean, can I stop you for a minute? Couple of questions about layering. I don't know if you're going to go to that next, but Parker wanted to know, why would you use layers? Why not just mix the, I guess, helter-skelter, carbon, nitrogen? And a related question is, if you are layering, when would it be how would you know that it's time to mix it up?
Right. So layering is the easier way. We call it the lasagna method. It's the easier way not to have to turn right away. And it also keeps animals out of your compost pile, because if you have food showing in your compost pile, the raccoon, the skunk, the possum, others will come in and they'll feast on your stuff. If you have carbon over it, then they'll generally be deterred from coming in and feasting on it. Now, you may not care whether you have animals coming in and feeding on your compost, but you may care. That might be a bear. It might be other animals that we do have to worry, we do have to watch out for. And we don't really want to bring wild animals closer to our domestic, our kids or our domestic animals, because of rabies and other reasons. So we really don't want to encourage them to come into the bins. So we always want to have a layer of carbon there. What we do, and this is a perfect place to talk about this, you can see this is a 3-bin unit used with recycled lumber. So they took something down and they built this bin, and these are the slats. So we're going to fill up the first bin, and then we're going to, when that bin is filled, then we can turn it into the second bin, and that keeps us organized. So that we're once this is filled up, then we'll put it into the next one, and then when the next one is filled up, the first one is filled up again, then we'll jump everything over one. And by the time we get to the third container, we've got compost. So we really don't need to do a lot of turning. One of the reasons that we turn is to mix and size reduce. But when we mix too much, we can put some fresh organics out on the outside, so it attracts animals. Other questions? what size bin would I recommend for a home garden? Depends on how much you produce, how many leaves you have. And I know like most of us have a lot of leaves. It depends on how much you actually want to compost, but I would go with I'd prefer to have a 4x4x4 3-bin system. It's more organized and it works well. If one is layering, okay, we got that one. Okay. Okay. So, this is a nice unit. This is another homemade juice barrel. So they took the juice barrel, they put it on sawhorses or a sawhorse type thing and made their own rotating drum. One problem with rotating drums is you really should use a rotating drum as a batch. So that means you need to have all the material ready to go in there to actually make it work. Because rotating drums, first of all, it's off the ground. And as winter comes, it's going to be harder for that to stay warm. If we have a whole batch in there, we can do that. And I think, let me just look. Yeah. So these rotating drums are at a school and they actually bought them on eBay. They cost about $500 a piece if you bought them new. But these guys were able to get them for like $50 or $60 on eBay. So the middle school actually bought them and used them. And what they found was they really had to fill the whole thing up. So they had to have a week's worth of organics to be able to, a week or two's worth of organics to actually put in there and then start the turning. So you do have to fill them up so that you have the carbon and the nitrogen in there, and then we start doing the turning. And they ended up with five or six of these green rotating drum bins, and it worked pretty well. The middle school kids really liked it. They really got involved, and I believe the school is in Camden, New York, and I believe they're still composting. So it's, a way to teach the kids to sort, how to sort, and all that kind of stuff. This is a bin that I think we feature in there's a fact sheet called Let's Get Growing. And that's to implement composting in a community or in a school. And we have some of these in different parts of the state where somebody just simply designed this 6x6x6 bin. Now, if you're a school or a community, what you want to do, you want to think about sizing. And it's less how much you're actually producing and more what size is your bucket. Because if you have, if you make a 4x4x4 bin and you have a loader bucket that's 6 foot, you're not going to be able to use it to do any of the turning. And when you have a whole school's worth of food waste, you really don't want to be doing it by hand, probably. You can, but it gets old after a while, depending on whose job it is to do. And it's got to be something that's doable for a school or it won't actually happen. So what we encourage people to do is to figure out what their bucket size is for that school, because most of them move some snow around their parking lots. And then build these bins so that they can actually fill the students. A lot of times it's not, sometimes we can have students involved in actually bringing the organics out, and sometimes we can't. It depends on whether it's part of an agriculture or a science class. And then it's not a permanent thing. So we have to make sure that it's part of somebody's job to sort out, to make sure that they're getting the food waste that's been sorted out in the cafeterias by the students out to the compost bins. So it's got to be a doable, and we talk a lot about that in the fact sheet for schools and communities to be able to do that. So a good one to do, but you can imagine having something like this at a community garden. If you have large community gardens where people are communally gardening, going ahead and putting one there so that you can take in other materials from the community. When people come to farmers markets and things like that, if there's a permanent site that's usable, something like this can be used in those, and they take very little work. And generally there's somebody that has a small bobcat or something like that that can be used to turn these bins. We also have containers. These are called hot boxes, and they were put in cities more. I've seen them at some colleges as well. And these were actually made out of plastic lumber, and they have perforated PVC pipes that go into the different layers. Now this is, well, you can see from this design as well. But what they've done is you don't really need that much air coming into the piles if you build the piles well. So having one layer works, but these are all open-ended. It's not a filled bin. They've had to actually cap them because too much air is going into the system. When a compost pile, when we layer our materials, we layer them, and then they start generating heat. And where does the heat come from a compost pile? Anybody know?
Sorry, from the middle out?
Yeah,
The
but
bottom.
what generates it? What happens? How does that happen?
The microbes are
Metabolizing. The microbes are metabolizing. Yes. It's just like having a whole room of fifth grade kids together. You don't have to heat the room. They're all giving off energy. And these microbes are giving off energy. And so that's where that heat's coming from. It doesn't come from the sun. It doesn't come from other places. It really comes from the microorganisms working. And if they're working well, if they're happy, they're going to be giving off heat. So if they're getting too much air through these pipes, then it's going to be too cool and they're not going to be able to give off as much heat. It's going to dry things out. So they capped the ends of these perforated PVC pipes as they were processing some of the material. So you really can get away with putting these on the bottom. And you know what happens in the compost pile, as I said, is it heats up, heat rises. It's called the chimney effect. And then the heat circulates around the material. And that's important, that the microbes can get that air, they can use it, and it happens pretty naturally in the process. And that's pretty much what I have for right now. I'll open things up to discussion. And I just wanted to get people thinking a little bit about community composting as well. So having those larger bins, or we're actually starting a project where a 13-year-old wanted to work on food security. And she has decided that we're going to be doing we have 5 families, 5 community groups that are working together that have applied. And they're going to be working on growing their own food. So tomorrow I'm going out to prepare some soils, mix some soils with compost, and those will be conveyed to some of these raised beds and vertical gardens so that people will be able to grow some of their own food. So we're really trying to work with communities and make sure people have options and healthy food.
Thank you, Jean. There was a question about, in our area, we have the Asian jumping worms.
Yes, yeah, and they are becoming more and more problematic. What's the question? So they're
I
not
think,
the compost worms.
no, I think they're, they take over, I think. Wendy was the one that asked the question. I don't have them, so but I think they are not a good thing to have.
So, yeah, the question is, any info on Asian jumping worms?
Yeah,
Columbia
what's
County?
happening is they're taking over the habitat of other beneficial worms, and they're really I guess, trashing the soil more than building the soil. And we do count on worms to build soil, but they're taking the habitat of a lot of different worms. So we think, we think probably a lot of them are being conveyed in plants when people do plant sales, and we get things from less from probably certified nurseries, because a lot of times their materials are more vetted. But when we do garden club swaps, and I swap loads of plants with my neighbors and friends and relatives. So sometimes we can be moving things around that we don't want to, and we think the Asian jumping worms probably are here because of that. What can we do to deter them? I don't have the answers for that. So I'm not going to be able to answer that one. But, as much as possible, if a compost product is made and fully gets to temperature, you won't have the eggs from the Asian jumping worms in there. So generally, compost was being pointed, the finger was being pointed at composting. I don't think that's the way they're getting into communities. I really think they're getting in through plants, plant sales, plant swaps, that kind of stuff from other areas.
Another question is from Sarah. I've been composting in metal trash cans and stirring them weekly as I add materials. Am I stirring too often? Should I leave it be?
Do you have any holes, Sarah? Do you have any holes in those trash cans?
Let me see if I can find her and I can allow her to talk so she can. There we go.
Yeah.
I think I clicked that for Sarah. Yes. So Sarah, just unmute.
Yes, I do have holes in there. There are holes on the bottom and around the bottom on the sides of the.
Okay, so the stirring that you're doing is mixing a little bit.
Yes.
But the microbes are actually probably getting enough air without that mixing. So if you've size reduced a lot of your material, so either chopped it up or grind your leaves or whatever, then they'll break down pretty well with just the holes in the cans.
Okay.
You saw the 2-can composter. It actually has an airspace all the way around. There's a 30-gallon and a 50-gallon inside the other, one inside the other. And then there's a rock on the bottom that allows for air to get all the way around that inside container.
I have them up on cinder blocks. I don't have 2 cans. I just have a single can that I'm using.
Okay. I'd probably put it on the ground. I wouldn't put it on cinder blocks. I think you probably will lose some heat doing it that way because things tend to freeze. It's outdoors, I take it.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I think I would put those on the ground and do it that way. And it does work. I use both metal and plastic ones for different purposes.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
There's let's see, there's someone with their hand up. So I'll see if they want to say something. Nona.
And I don't mind if we open up everybody's mics as long as we don't have a lot of feedback. It's okay with me.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can.
Great. I think I have 3 questions. I'll see if I can get through them quickly. One, I have fruit trees. I've always read that when you prune them, you should burn because of disease. And I also have a fungus in my orchard. I mean, this is this little backyard orchard. And I'm wondering, do I need to do that? Can those be safely composted to kill diseases and fungi?
They can be safely composted as long as you have a large pile. So it's important that you have the mass because you want to get up to temperature to kill disease. And I do a lot of disease work with pathogenic organisms, with avian influenza, with cholera, with other things. And we use that heat. That heat is purposefully used to kill the diseases, the plant diseases.
And they kill the
plant diseases,
the mold, the rot diseases too.
They're part of the process, and they should, yes, as long as you come up to temperature, you should kill those. You should kill the diseases.
Okay, Second question, what for just, home use, what's the best piece of equipment that's reasonably priced for chopping stuff up?
Boy, I wish I knew. I wish I could afford that one anyway. I don't know. There's a lot of little pieces of equipment that I'd like to have for myself.
I mean, do people use chippers? Is that what you have to get to?
Yeah, but do you want to have a chipper for yourself? I mean, if you had a neighborhood chipper, I encourage like soil and water conservation districts to have chippers because they're handy and they are good. It is good to be able to make chips, but it's kind of expensive to have a large enough one to do very much for you.
Right. But
I
just,
grew up in Rockland County and we had leaves and trees down and all that kind of stuff. And we'd need a pretty good size one to be able to manage.
but what about like the thick weeds or the more twiggy stuff? It still seems like it'd be better if it
Make
was.
a separate pile.
Yeah, I do make a separate pile. I jump on it. I also get on top of my compost piles and I bounce on them to break the sticks up after a while. And they get smaller, but yeah, it's hard. I wish I had a better answer for you for some kind of a small cheaper, but
Doesn't exist. Okay.
I think you, yeah.
One
So,
last, yeah, I know this.
We have a lot of other questions. I'm sorry. Do you mind if we move on? Because there's many people that have asked questions. Let's see. Parker had a question about roots. He has a lot of roots in the bottom of the bin. Is there anything, is he doing something wrong, or he or she, sorry, I don't know. What am I doing wrong that I'm getting all the roots?
There are a lot of roots from trees that are in the bin, or the things are growing out of the bin, or
I guess it's growing at the bottom. Parker, do you want to unmute? And I don't know if you can.
I can, hold on just 1 second and I'll get to Parker and allow, there we go.
And I apologize if it's a lady and I called.
I'm in New York City, so hopefully it won't be too loud in the background. They're just roots growing in the bottom.
from trees or from grass or what?
Trees or weeds, or it is in a place where there are lots of trees. So fortunately, there are a lot of leaves around that I can use, but I don't know what it is that's growing. I don't know if I'm stirring it too much, if I'm mixing it too much and there's air and I'm allowing things to grow, or.
Yeah, you should just be filling up that bin. What type of bin do you have?
It's just using kind of sticks on the edges. So I'm hoping it's 3 by 3 by 3.
Okay. And are your sticks growing?
The sticks are not growing, no.
Not okay, because there are a lot of they call them quick sticks. They actually do grow. Okay. So it probably is tree roots and stuff like that. And I would either move your bin or just go ahead and keep going. Just keep composting, keep putting stuff on top of it because it doesn't seem to be bothering the roots of trees. You could send me a picture. I'd be happy to have a picture.
Okay, great. And just a follow-up question, is there such a thing as too much turning? It sounds like you want to keep it hot in there. So
Yeah, actually,
much.
Yeah, actually, we don't even need to turn our compost, our large scale compost as much as we do. And it wastes fuel when we do. So, 3 turns or so is really fine. You don't need to do a lot of turning.
Like once a week, or is that too much?
Oh, no, that's way too much. I don't have time for that. No, and it's not gonna really advance you that much.
Thank you.
So I would slow down a little bit. It sounds like you're getting way too much air in it. Think about whenever you turn, it's like putting all those microbes in a washing machine or whatever and mixing them around. They have habitats and they want to function in those habitats. So when we really disturb them a lot, it's not actually helping them work harder. So insulate them, give them plenty of wet and dry materials and go from there.
Thank you.
Sheila had a question. If you have a bin made of wire, do you need to cover it with a tarp?
No, I don't cover mine with a tarp at all. I like the air to be able to flow in through the bin. And those are considered more holding bins, but you can compost in them, especially if you make them large enough. If you take like a 15-foot length of wire, it'll be a good size and you can get a lot in there. You can put a lot of leaves in and a lot of food, and make sure you're marrying that the leaves and food. If you can have some neighbors that want to, contribute to your composting effort, then you can compost some of their food waste as well. So as much as we can, let's be communal about this and, compost as much, save as much of that organic matter as possible.
Another question was, does the heat build up before the bin is full?
You have to have that mass to actually get heat. So you really have to have a 4 or 5 foot pile to start getting heat in it. So yes, it has to be warm. It has to be a volume.
I think I got all the questions that I see. I don't know if anybody wants to raise their hand, or if you have another question, please bring it forward now.
Okay, here we go. Linda.
Hi, I have only just started composting with a drum composter. And it sounds like it will probably freeze over the winter. So how do you make it come back to life in the spring if it freezes?
Just make sure you fill it up with plenty of leaves and food and whatever. Make sure it's good and full. It will just melt as the ambient temperature rises.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So yeah. Yep.
And it looks like Nona has another question.
Yeah, this is my last one. I have made compost without turning it at all. Takes a long time.
Right.
But you can do it, right? That way?
Yes. Yep. That's how I do most of mine. I go around to family and friends and I'll say, you haven't, I have some time because I'm visiting or whatever, and I'll start excavating their compost and bringing out the stuff that is broken down. Because if you raise some of the stuff on top, you'll see that compost is happening on the bottom. You're creating compost on the bottom. So I'll oftentimes take those wire bins off, lift them off. And usually I do put a stake, a rebar or a fence post in that, because they can tip over. They can blow over and stuff like that. And just so you don't end up with a mess, stake that in. But I'll take that whole bin up and move it next to each other. And then I start my second bin. And the first one works its way out, works the process out.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
So, Jean, there were several people that said thank you so very much. It was excellent.
Good.
And this was a question you promised you would answer, so I'm going to ask it. A lot of people are afraid to have a compost pile because of bears. Can you speak to that at all?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I was working with a camp in the Catskills, 20 plus years ago, because they had a bear problem. They had the bear coming to the dumpster and eating out of the dumpster, and they really needed to keep it away from kids. So they asked us to come in and teach them to compost. So we built a compost bin for them, a large-ish compost bin, and filled it up. And the bear went back to the dumpster, walking right past the composter. So it didn't even know it was there. So really what we need to do is we need to make sure that we have a good biofilter over all material. And I was saying earlier, we should never see an eggplant sticking out, a pumpkin sticking out. That just attracts animals into the pile to eat it, because why wouldn't they? So if we make sure we have a good biofilter, cover everything up, have good carbon, that insulates it, So it can get warmer, and it also allows things to break down, and it doesn't attract, we don't attract animals. I almost take offense to the fact that rats and composting are together, you know, are associated, because I've never had a rat in a compost pile. I've had an opossum sleeping in one once, but I've never had a rat, and I'm around compost all the time. And I really just don't see them around there at all.
Gail asked the question, if she wanted to contact you, do you have an email or
Yeah.
from the, I'm sorry.
Our website is right on that slide, and my email is jb29@cornell.edu.
Thank you.
There we go. Yeah, and you can write that in the chat if you want.
Yeah, Thea just did actually, so.
This
Yep.
this PowerPoint, this program that we're all on right now is going to be posted, so you'll be able to watch it again. If people
Yes, thank you.
if people are taking this, turning around and teaching, you're welcome to use our slides. They're public domain. Give us credit, but I don't have any problem with people that are teaching using our PowerPoints. In fact, a version of this PowerPoint is on the website, and you can download it.
Thank you so much. I think there are no more questions, and we so appreciate you giving us your time, and I think we've made a lot of people excited about composting. It sounds like a lot of people are already, but
Yeah,
can always learn something new, right?
it's always good, and sometimes you can talk about composting for hours.
Thank
Well,
you.
maybe next year we can have you come and build us a pile. Excuse me.
That would be wonderful. I'd love to do a hands-on workshop with people.
That would be fun.
Great.
That would be wonderful.
And if you have a
Great.
school that wants to get involved, if you do have a school in mind, we can come down, and I would come down, because I personally have a vested interest in wanting schools to learn to do it.
Yes, yes, thank you. And actually, we do want to get that going, so we may take you up on that.
That would be good. Read the fact sheet first.
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for all your great questions and attention. And with that, I think we will conclude.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jean. And thank you, Thea.
Thank you.